Hello. Wonderful to be here. What an amazing event. What a great group of speakers.
Hello.
So I would talk more about some of the projects that I've done. I'll just briefly say, but I actually want to go into sort of some core questions about the creation of what we call immersive. So a little bit about me. I am originally a theater director who drifted. So I'm also an educator who drifted. So essentially you're watching a person who's been drifted. So where I drifted from initially was literature, language, poetry. I got interested in theater. I started interested in storytelling. I became interested in the writers who told traditional stories or linear stories, largely. And then at some point, I became interested in transmedia, in the way in which one could tell stories in multiple platforms. That drew me into games, that drew me later into immersive performance. And the entire time, the specter of traditional storytelling, where you have a beginning, middle, and an end, where something transcends the imagination of your own and shares it with another, that leads to an outcome, a persuasion. And the study of plot and the study of heroes and journeys are largely following a certain pattern, but not necessarily by medium. So we have creators like Wes Anderson, or Anne Ernaux, or the amazing film Everything Everywhere Now at Once, which are in traditional mediums, but they're immersive narratives. So is immersive a narrative, is it performance, is it an experience? Well, to me, see if the slide is up. No, it's not. Yeah, here we go. So to me, there are three categories of immersivity. What I'm going to talk to today is more about the relationship of what we know as narrative as from traditional to immersive, or I like to sometimes say not a traditional but frontal, where you are being delivered the narrative and you follow it. To me, this led me to thinking about space. So a lot of my talk is about spatial narrative and the relationship of how we design the space for a story to happen. So, briefly, a story, to me, maybe you agree, maybe you don't, is a way of sharing something in a single medium. So it has its structure afforded by that medium, the medium affordance. When you translate it or adapt it to a different medium, you don't need everything that was in the original medium. So now you're beginning to sort of crack open the piggy bank and take only what you need. You don't need everything from the novel in the film. You don't need everything from the film in the game, in the act, in the treasure hunt. But they're still related. There's a coherence. The traditional narrative of a novel does not relate to the immersive experience of a game. So we need a system for this. So I'm going to talk about the relationship of these three words: shape, space, and story. And of course, the title of this piece is about the labyrinth, so that is ultimately where I'm headed. So, walking the slide. So, I look at these four shapes. The circle, which is also the sphere or the dome. It's a story that ends as it begins. That's a narrative design. The square, a cube, there's also a cube, but it's also a nesting story, stories within stories, like Scheherazade. The triangle is also a pyramid, which we're very familiar with because we've been talking about Hero's Journey a lot today, or the Freytag's principle of rising action, falling action, denouement. This is so much of the template of traditional storytelling. One might actually just say it is, but we do know that the story that ends and the nesting story are also used in traditional narrative. So lastly, the spiral, or the labyrinth, which to me is the immersive narrative. So again, just take a look at it in their totality. I feel like I might be walking, I feel like but I don't want to fall off the stairs. So this, to me, because it's spatial, is a spatial narrative. It's encountered rather than explained. It's experienced through and within its enchanted locations. So story elements that are translatable. To go back a metaphor ago, the piggy bank, the coins within the piggy bank, are in fact your story elements or your narrative elements, characters and settings. Also props, also costumes, key objects, treasure chests. These elements can be adapted and exchanged in different mediums. So when we talk about the labyrinth, and why the labyrinth I think is very key. So a distinction. We use the term labyrinth and maze commonly interchangeably. They're actually different. The maze is a confusion meant to hide something, made to challenge the people who get lost in the maze. We see this in the Renaissance hedges. We see this in the common understanding of the Minotaur and Theseus. But a labyrinth is actually a pathway that you only enter in only one place to enter, and you pass through it to the center. At the center is an event, but the biggest event is how you exit it, the same way you came in. So it aligns with the journey of self-discovery and learning. You know, you pass yourself as you go through it. Some images of mazes. Both the world and its life is symbolized in the labyrinth. Challenges, you meet yourself along the way. And it's also very spatial, right? We remember things in our spaces that we see each other with. It's also meditative. Clearly, it's used in here in sharp, here in rock formation. Very popular, continuing to be used. And so what happens in this designed walk? Something that is not from the designer, but is for you who walks the path. Remember where I am? So we recall spaces that we have lived and we have traveled. A memory palace. How many of you know the term memory palace? So the earliest reference that I know of goes back to the Roman Cicero, who would remember his long, famous oratories by creating a palace in his head within which each of those memories were stored. But when you go to write your life, you do it chronologically rather than spatially. When one goes to tell a story, one begins like David Copperfield at the beginning, right? And one moves through in time. But actually, our lives are more experienced as spaces. So think about your own life for a moment, and think about the degree to which the places you have lived have are containers for those memories. The way in which a home is filled with artifacts and memorabilia and nostalgia, a key seashell, right? That's an experience of the place that can be forgotten or can be rediscovered. But it's the spaces and places that align with our memory, and thereby one can consider immersive narrative as aligning more to the way we remember and the way that we challenge ourselves on a version of discovery. More images. The famous Minotaur. The idea that the center would be a battle, like this one from Crete. There's another version of it in Peloponnese, of Daedalus, the great artificer, who Stephen Dedalus takes his name from in James Joyce's work, created a maze that at the center was the Gorgon, or the Medusa. So it's a template for a magic circle. Now, we think a circle, certainly the image of the circle, is you're either inside or you're outside. But the question for the labyrinth is, how does one enter? right? It's also a place where the two worlds flow together, not just the inside and the outside, but the different rings. In classical labyrinths, there were 7 rings, which also aligns to 7 potential plot points or transformations. So the relationship of the labyrinth as a design is key to thinking about delivering an experience as opposed to telling a story. We talked a lot about telling stories today, but in a sense, the story, the way I see it, the story aligns with the walls of the labyrinth. The experience is the empty path that is created in the center. So in the famous story, it's Theseus who is the hero. That's the sort of theater version. In the immersive version, we've replaced Theseus with the audience, with the user, with the player. Another part of the story is the Princess Ariadne gives Theseus a thread by which to find his way back. The thread might, in some sense, be the inner journey of the character. But the path, the empty path at the center, I mean, when we look at it with these drone photographs or these artist illustrations, we're looking at the labyrinthine design. But what we're not thinking about is the journey that the audience is going on. So as theater directors, as writers, storytellers of all kind, we think a lot about the construction of the walls, in other words, the story, right? But it's actually the testing of it by how you walk it and what's available to you as you walk it. Not just with events and phenomena, but also the deeper it goes. So if the challenge you're looking to encounter is personal and transformational, the experience design that needs to be created doesn't actually have to be a physical labyrinth, but it has to be designed as a pathway that is beyond time. Because this is spatial is not the same as temporal. Spatial is, it's just a different template for designing work. So this opens us up to an experience if we design in this way. And retracing our way out and seeing again that which first confused us. We teach in universities. Oh, guilty, I'm also a university professor. I teach in New York at the State University of New York at Purchase. And I was educated in a pattern where you built the Freytag's pyramid of learning. You know, feed, unload your knowledge, and then ask for testing and ask for responses, see what the learning outcome has been. And it's kind of a failure. It's actually a major failure. It's one of the reasons that education is so fragile right now, and the arts are actually fairly robust. It's a failure because I shouldn't be teaching, I should be facilitating their knowledge. I shouldn't be giving them what I've learned, although, you know, that's the marketing of the college, learn from great professors who know stuff. But actually, the more success I have as a teacher is similar to the way I have as an artist when I make my central empathy with them who need to learn how to learn how to collaborate, learn how to find on their own, learn how to invent. Because ultimately, we are constantly entering a new era of entrepreneurism, a new era of art making, a new era of collaboration. Segregation of technology in the arts is a permeable wall that is leaking all over the place in interesting and provocative ways. But the students who have chosen to go get an education are actually being hobbled by a system which attempts to make them full of data, full of information. And even the creators of AI learned that that wasn't good for teaching AI, that it needed to be neural networks, right? So we're not teaching them comparisons and relationships. And the same aligns with our art making. We're not facilitating an audience's journey. We're telling a story. And the term storyteller has a kind of, shamanistic idea in our culture. But I think some of the greatest shamans themselves would actually acknowledge that you allow a person to go on a path. It's an interesting correlation because the labyrinth is used by spiritual people and in personal transformation. But in fact, that is not what we ask of ourselves when we're thinking about what we're making. So a couple of quick templates of how one builds these. Not wanting to go too long in time. Branching narratives is a labyrinthine form. Open story worlds, which I think we're more familiar with in the term immersive, and nonlinear narratives, where we're actually beating time back. So these are templates for experiences that can use the labyrinth. All tales are at some point a journey into the woods to find the missing parts of us and retrieve it and make ourselves whole. Isn't that it? Isn't it about the forest? Isn't it about what we do in the wilderness? And if one can create that in a narrative, more powerful. And lastly, a bonus slide, even though I don't have time. In Westworld, that's how Arnold teaches Dolores to evolve. He forgoes the triangle, and he begins to build the labyrinth. So thanks.